Happy Epiphany, everybody. I wanted to do a video today on grieving through the holidays. I had discussed doing it earlier in the holiday season, but it just ended up not working out. And for me, I have experienced personal grief through the holidays, and it is interesting how that has transpired in my life. So this year marked 4 years since my brain surgery, which I had been diagnosed with a brain tumor on November 24th of 2014, had the brain surgery, the brain tumor removed on December 17th, found out my older brother had passed away on December 19th, and then a guy that I really liked went and found a new girlfriend within a week of all of that happening. So I had a really rough time about 4 years ago just processing all of these different pieces. Like, we can grieve more than just death. We can grieve health or a loss of health. We can grieve the loss of a friend, even if that isn't through death. And so grief shows up so differently in so many people. You know, there's those standard 5 stages of grief that people talk about, where it's like shock, denial, anger, acceptance, and whatever those 5 steps are. And that's one way that some people, that's a pretty standard way that people process grief. But it's not so, this week you experience this, then this week it's that, and then the following week you're gonna feel this one. It's very unique to every individual. For me, losing my health, being liking control, I wanted to gain control over anything that I could. With losing the guy that I really liked, I wanted to do anything. I wanted to just gain back control in some way. It didn't matter what I could get my hands on. I just wanted control. So I had been on Catholic Match at the time. I went on a few dates. I was like ready to get married and all these different things. But regardless, this was 2014. I had converted Catholic in 2013 at Easter. So I had one Advent prior to all of this happening, and I did a lot of videos during that Advent in 2013. I had done, why Advent was important, the true Christmas season. I talk about, it might have even been in 2014 that I did one on the Christmas decorations and putting them up later and not doing them too early and all these different pieces. But for me, since 2014, Advent is a fickle time. I do great with Lent. I enjoy giving something up and replacing it with the almsgiving and with prayer. However, Advent is just rough. Like, Alec and I went to Mass on the very first Sunday of Advent, and then we went to Mass today. We haven't been to Mass at all in between. And I just know that eventually, for me, there is going to be a year that all of it passes away. All of a sudden, it's going to be such an infiltrated Advent season for me that God is going to work through that. And that's where hope comes in. I have a hope that God is my heart will soften. Whatever is going on subconsciously will be processed so that I'm actually able to fully submerge myself into the Advent season and allow the full preparation to come into fruition of preparing for Christ to come, which I think is fitting to discuss on Epiphany, when the Magi finally find Christ. They say that the opposite of grief is joy. So when we look at the fruits of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, those are the first 3. And so grief limits joy. We aren't able, we're human beings. We are very complex when it comes to our emotions, but experiencing 2 separate, like having extreme grief and extreme joy at the same time, it can conflict within ourselves because they are at 2 opposite spectrums. It's like being happy and sad, and we can, I can choose to be sad, I can choose to be depressed, I can choose to be complacent, or simply just, I guess monotone is the word that comes to mind for me, where I'm not exuberant about anything, but rather just sort of sitting back and letting life go as it rolls. And I don't think that's how we're called to live. God calls us to move forward, to be proactive in our lives, to long for Him, to seek Him, to knock and the door will be open. There are so many different pieces of us actively needing to pursue him in order to find him. And that doesn't happen every day. It doesn't have to happen every day to still be a good Catholic, to still be a good person. We can falter. We're human. I mean, you look in the Catechism, paragraph 1008, talks about how death is a consequence of sin. Okay, like all of the early church fathers talk about how when someone you know dies, you can rejoice. If you're not rejoicing, you aren't trusting God. However, there is a piece of that says, okay, but not everyone goes to heaven. Like, we do need to kind of question salvation of others and of ourselves. We trust that people are in purgatory, perhaps finding their way to God. But to find that as a solace, for me, doesn't work. Because I feel like it's sugarcoating something. I feel like it's saying, oh, well, it's fine that they died because they're in heaven. I'll see them again one day. When really it's like, well, if I'm not supposed to judge whether or not somebody goes to hell, how can I judge that they actually went to heaven? Because the moment that I say that this person made it into heaven, I would be saying that I could also determine whether or not someone went to hell. So I think it's important for me, especially in my grieving process, to come to terms with some of that, to say, we are all on this journey. We pray for those that have gone on before us, that they would be either in purgatory or in union with God. But earthly death is still sad. Like, the shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept when he found out his friend Lazarus had died. And then he rose him from the grave. And so it's the one person that got to get out of his earthly death and then experienced a later one. But Jesus wept. There is a sadness that is 100% appropriate and okay when it comes to mourning the loss of somebody that we were close with. We look at Job in the Old Testament, like he lost his entire family. He lost everything. But there's a possibility to grieve and to be sad and still not lose faith. We don't lose this knowledge that God exists and that he is there for us, and that if we need to fall back on him, he's there. It's that story of the footprints through the sand, right? Like, 2 footprints walking along, God, we were great. Things got rough. There's one set of footprints. You left me. And he says, no, I was carrying you. Don't you see? Like, I was right there with you. And actually, like, you weren't even bearing the majority of this load. I carried you through it. And just holding on to that knowledge, like knowing that God exists. Like, I can be sinful. I can be neglectful. I can not go to Mass during Advent. And while it's something that like bereaves my soul, while it makes me sad, and I wonder what it is within me that holds me back, like subconsciously, because it's a difficult piece to process, and I'm still working through it 4 years later. I would just say that there is still hope. Like, and God isn't going to abandon me. He's not going to say, like, the first Sunday we didn't go to Mass, Alex said, well, I don't know, like, what about your salvation? And it's like, well, I'm pretty sure God would have mercy on my soul. I think I'll be okay, you know. But that's not to say that I can just neglect my relationship with God altogether. There's still a piece of all of it that comes down to, you know, still trying to do the readings or still finding a way to connect with God, even if it's not in the way that the church says that we're supposed to, because we're all on a journey. God judges us all based on our experiences. Like, he knows me better than I know myself. He understands what holds me back during the Advent season. And one day he may be the one that is who helps me understand. And that could be while I'm still here on earth. It could be when I'm united with him in heaven. It could be at any point that he deems necessary. It could be through another person, because we're built for community and we're here. But I also know that I'm not alone in grieving during the holidays. I mean, losing my brother 6 days before Christmas is hard. I know other people who have lost, you know, their mom or their dad just months before Christmas. I had a friend who lost his wife just a couple weeks before Christmas. And there are all of these people that are just out there. And I mean, we can choose. My grandpa lost his dad on Christmas. And so every time Christmas came around, he was bitter. He allowed it to make him sour toward the day itself, when it's supposed to be a joyful day. And so we have a choice that we can either grow bitter and say, this is making me angry, and we can stay in that anger denial stage, or we can learn, find a way to process, whether that's through journaling, whether it's through reading, whether it's just, time, right? Time is, we're given time as humans. We experience time differently than God does. And so we're given this opportunity to actually be able to try to process through our emotions that are so complex that sometimes we can't even understand. But we have this ability. And so we can either choose to grow bitter, or we can choose to try to figure out how we can grow closer to God through it, how we can grow together as a community with those that are closest to us, and how we can grow in the church. How can we evangelize? How can we meet people where they are, in the fact that they might be grieving too. They could be experiencing something similar to what we went through. They could be experiencing something different and maybe just need a listening ear. Who knows? We just need to be available to be whoever it is that God is calling us to be in that moment. Because there's not a right way to grieve. There's not a right way to mourn. Some people might say, shortly after my brain surgery, I went to adoration. It was one of my first trips that I was able to drive. And I went, and there was an older lady there. I was there for maybe 10 minutes, and I started to get a really bad headache. So I decided to lay down in the pew, because I really wanted to spend time with Christ. I wasn't able to all through that Advent. And she started writing a letter. And I had seen this lady in there before. She's, kind of like the adoration police. If you're not kneeling right, or if you have your hat on, she's going to say something. And I was like, she's probably writing a letter right now, explaining on how I shouldn't be laying like this. And sure enough, she handed me the note card and walked out the door. And I only had to glance at it to know what it was. And I followed her out of there, and I said, you know what? I just had a brain surgery 2 weeks ago, and this is one of my first outings. So do not act like you can judge where other people are, because I happen to have a really bad headache right now, but I really want to spend this time with Christ. And you can't judge that. You can't project yourself onto other people and just expect that everybody's exactly where you are, and that there's a right way to pray or a right way to communicate with God. Because we're all on a journey. And we all grieve differently. We all experience life differently. And allowing others to be in that place that they need to be. There could be a grief of even of ourselves. If somebody is feeling drawn in a certain direction that they don't feel like they should be, they can grieve or mourn the fact that they can't pursue that. And that's okay. That's good. The grief is what we're grappling with. It's what we're trying to process and work through. And really, if it's not a struggle, it's not worth it. The things that are most worth it are the things that we have to work for. And so just bearing that in mind, I am really happy that it's a new year. I am doing a live stream here shortly, hopefully tonight, about my 2019 goals. And I look forward to being able to grow in who God is calling me to be as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter, as a granddaughter, in all the ways that He's calling me to be. I just long to be that. And I look forward to Lent, because I'm actually good at that one. I'm good at that liturgical season. Advent is just still rough for me. So I appreciate everybody who has been there for me. All of my patrons over on Patreon, thanks for hanging in there with me during this time and just maintaining your membership through a month. I know that a lot of my past videos have still been reaching people, and that's the whole goal, is it's just one person at a time. And if a video from 3 years ago that is still up is helping somebody, then that's what you're supporting in the times that I end up not posting. And I really appreciate everybody's patience with me, because I'm human. I'm gonna fall short sometimes, but all that we can do is just stand and get up and keep on going, because, just because your phone falls on the ground doesn't mean you have to stomp on it and crush it all the way, which my husband reminded me of just the other day. and it's just so important, and I'm so blessed with the community that we have here. So God bless you. Alistair is upstairs, but until next time, we'll see you later, alligator. Have a good night.